I have spent a good part of my life thinking about death. It just seems to have been that way. On the personal side of things, I was born to parents who 6 months earlier had buried their only daughter. So I was born into a home of grief. Growing up, my father spent many hours and times with people dying and dead, and it was not unusual for me to be at the funeral home. In the 6th grade, one of my good friends was run over by the school bus while we were waiting for them to arrive. I've had occasion personally to think a lot about death. And then there's the vocational side of this whole thing. I have sat at the bedside of people who were dying, and I've been there when they've died. I've been in the hospitals with them, and I've gone to the morgue with their bodies. I've been with the families afterwards as they grieved. I've been there when the professionals examined their bodies to determine the cause of their deaths. I've conducted the funerals. I've met the hearse at the front of the church, and I've walked the body or the ashes into the church. I've conducted the service, and I've walked them out, and I've gone with them to the cemetery or the mausoleum. These various activities with those dying and dead and those grieving tends to bring together the need to ponder death. Personally and vocationally. That's not to say that it's something that I like to do a lot or that it's anything great and wonderful, but I think in doing that, I'm probably a little bit outside the norm of humanity, at least in our society. I think I've spent more time thinking about it than our society wants to consider death. You think? Socially or in our society, we do everything we can to hide from the reality of death and dying. When someone dies, we paint them up so they look like they're alive. How often have you heard someone go, "Oh, my, they sure look good"? And you know the next thing that's in their mind that they don't say is, "And it's the first time in a long time." We try to encourage each other and everyone to acquire everything that we can, because if we just have enough stuff, we can deny and do away with death. An author I read recently talked about how in any given year, this percentage of folks are this age who die, this percentage of folks are this age, and this percentage of folks are this age. But he said the number we never talk about is the death expectancy rate. And he said to date it's been pretty much 100%. You and I, we may want to talk about it. It may be a bit uncomfortable for us. But I think that it's counter to what we encounter in society. The need to deny the reality of our finality. You like how that rhymed there? Our need to deny what is going to happen to us dictates how we stay closed up within ourselves. It's strange to me that we would talk in this manner about death, but then think about what happens in our gospel today. Jesus is out and about, and And John tells us that the Greeks went to Philip. Now, they went to Philip because Philip is a Greek name. But here's the other thing you should know about this thing about the Greeks. The Greeks weren't a group. For John, the Greeks were everyone. It was this nondescript everybody out there. And they came to Jesus. And when they came to Jesus, they came to Philip and they said, "We want to see Jesus." You have no idea how many pulpits have that carved into the top of them. But anyway, we want to see Jesus. And so when they went to Jesus, this is what happened. He did not give them a welcome packet. He didn't say, "Come on, we're going down to the pub for a few." He didn't say that. He didn't say, "Come on, this is going to be a great ride. We're going to have a great time." No, what he began to do was he began to talk about death. He began to talk about dying. And he began to say that if you walk this way with me, to walk this way means you walk the way of death. I tend to think about death in two different seasons of the year, more than other times. Personally, I think about it in December. And I think about it in December because in my family I've had more births and deaths in December than any other month. And vocationally, I think about it during Lent. Because how can you hear these scriptures and not in some way think about death and dying? So Jesus invites them on this way, this Lenten journey, that we are going to walk this way to death. And there begins the next phase of the story. There's this fellow named Thomas Lynch. The folks who've been with me this weekend are so tired of hearing his name. This guy named Thomas Lynch, he's a mortician poet. How you like that? He and his family own Lynch & Sons Funeral Home in Milford, Michigan. And I came to know of him in 2007 when Frontline on PBS did a show on him and his family. The reason they did the show is that his book in the 1990s was nominated for a National Book Award. So we're talking no slouch here. The name of his book, by the way, is The Undertaking. And in great, wonderful, poetic fashion, he says that I've come to believe that the task of the living is to take the dead where they need to go so we can get where we need to be. Let's let that sit there for a minute. The task of the living is to take the dead where they need to go so that we can get where we need to be. I've noticed for myself that as I have lived my life to this point, and as I have been around and through and contemplated deaths and dyings, I've noticed that there have been some changes in me. One of those changes has to do with the core questions of my life. In my younger years, my question of myself over and over was, how can I get to where I need to be? Sound familiar? How can I be the person I need to be? How can I get there? How can I arrive? How can I do what I need to do to be there? And I've spent a good part of my life contemplating that question. and working toward that goal. I'm aware that at some point there was a transition for me. And it became, the core question for me became, how can I live more faithfully? I'm not real excited about dying tomorrow. I'll be honest with you. But I'm not as afraid of it as I used to be. And I think there's something in that for me. You see, that question is ever before us. If we follow Jesus, it means that somehow we must die to who we are to become who we are to be. If the seed falls on the ground, it must die in order to come to life and bear fruit. If you are to follow Jesus, somehow it's about stripping away this thing that we think is life, this wall around us. And to do that means we must deal with our own finality, our mortality. And if we can do that, maybe, just maybe, we can glimpse a closer relationship with God, one that is not separated by our need to deny. But there's another part to this. We, as followers of Jesus, know two great facts. That one is that we talk about death, we talk about the resurrection. Read the burial office in the prayer book. That's what it's about. Death and resurrection. But the reality is we can't get to the resurrection until we go through the cross. We have to experience that death for ourselves. But the time is coming when there's something more. Now, I'll tell you, I have all kinds of ideas about it, but I don't know diddly squat about what's going to happen after I die. I have some beliefs, and those are important. But I do know one important thing. I know that everything will die except one thing: the love of God. And that what the resurrection means to me is the enduring presence of God's love forever. And that whatever may happen to me as I go through this change in my body, that I will be held forever in the all-encompassing and never-dying love of God. The task of the living is to get the dead, take the dead where they need to go, so that we can be where we need to be. Maybe that's what happens with the dead